It is the 25th of March, 1945, and the war in Europe is almost over. The Third Reich is collapsing from both sides. In a command post in Western Germany, one of the most famous generals alive is bent over a map, and he is not looking at the front line. He is looking at a small town 50 miles past it, deep inside enemy territory, where there is nothing his army needs and no objective worth a single life. His staff officers do not understand why he keeps staring at it. The answer is a name on a list of prisoners, and the name belongs to his own family. This is the story of what George Patton did when he learned his son-in-law was held in a German prison camp, and of the rescue mission that turned into the worst decision of his career. His name was George S. Patton, and by the spring of 1945, he was a legend, aggressive, profane, brilliant, and impossible to control. His Third Army had torn across France faster than almost anyone believed possible. The German High Command tracked his movements more carefully than those of any other Allied commander. But fame and ego came tied together in the same man, and the higher his reputation climbed, the more his superiors worried about what he might do if no one was watching. The orders from above were simple. Hold the line. Keep pushing east in good order. Stay coordinated with the armies on either flank, and do not go chasing private adventures. Dwight Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander, wanted no surprises this late in the game, with victory only weeks away. There was no reason to gamble lives now. Everyone knew the Germans were finished. The only question was how many more men had to die before they admitted it. But Patton had received a piece of information that he could not put down. Somewhere behind the German line, in a camp called XIII-B near the town of Hammelburg, the Americans believed a large group of captured United States officers was being held, and among them, almost certainly, was Lieutenant Colonel John Waters. Waters was not just any officer. He was married to Patton's eldest daughter, Beatrice. He was the general's son-in-law, and he had been a prisoner for 2 years. To understand what happened next, you have to go back to February of 1943, to the deserts of Tunisia. There, in some of the first real fighting between American and German troops, the inexperienced United States forces were badly beaten near Kasserine Pass. In the confusion of that defeat, John Waters was captured. He was moved deep into the German prison system, eventually to a camp in Poland called Oflag 64, far beyond any hope of rescue. For 2 years, Patton commanded armies across 2 continents, while his son-in-law sat behind barbed wire. There was nothing he could do. The front was always somewhere else. The distance was always too great. Then, in January of 1945, that changed. As the Soviet Red Army surged west into Poland, the Germans emptied the prison camps in its path. They marched the prisoners on foot, in the dead of winter, toward the interior of Germany. Waters was among them. He walked more than 300 miles over roughly 7 weeks, in freezing cold, on starvation rations. And the place that long march finally delivered him to, in early March of 1945, was Oflag 13B at Hammelburg. For the first time in 2 years, Patton's son-in-law was within reach of his army. Here is where Patton's judgment began to slip. He told the people around him that the camp held a large number of American officers who needed liberating, and that was true. The camp held more than 1,000 American officers and several thousand Serbian officers, many of them sick, freezing, and slowly starving. Freeing them was a worthy goal. But the timing, the secrecy, and the size of what he ordered all pointed at something more personal. Because Patton did not send a force big enough to do the job. He sent a force just big enough to hide what the job really was. The mission was handed to the 4th Armored Division. One of the officers involved, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, looked at the target and said plainly that this needed a much larger force, a full combat command, to have any chance. Hammelburg was 50 miles behind the German line. Getting there meant fighting the whole way in and the whole way back, through territory crawling with enemy troops. Abrams wanted strength. Patton overruled him. He approved a force of only about 300 men. Command of that small force fell to a tough, capable young officer named Captain Abraham Baum. The unit took his name, Task Force Baum. Roughly 300 soldiers, around 50 vehicles, a mix of Sherman tanks, light tanks, and half-tracks. Their job was to punch 50 miles into enemy Germany, break open a prison camp, load up hundreds of weak and wounded men, and bring them all the way back with 300 soldiers, against an entire region full of German forces. Notice what Patton kept hidden. He did not tell his own superiors the real reason. He did not say, "My son-in-law may be in that camp." The official version was a humanitarian rescue of American prisoners. The private truth, the one his family understood, was a father-in-law reaching across the front line for one specific man. Years later, Captain Baum himself would tell Patton that he found it hard to believe the whole mission had been sent just to rescue one person, and Patton, by most accounts, did not really deny it. On the night of the 25th of March, 1945, the orders came down, sudden and with almost no warning. Task Force Baum rolled out into the dark, crossed the German line, and disappeared into enemy country. From the very start, it was a running fight. The column shot its way through roadblocks and ambushes. German units, confused at first, quickly realized that a small American force was loose far behind their line, and they began converging from every direction. Baum's men fought through villages, across rivers, taking losses and pushing on. They had no air cover they could rely on, no reinforcements coming, and no way home except the same 50 miles of hostile ground they were burning through to get in. By the afternoon of the 27th of March, after fighting almost without rest, Task Force Baum reached Hammelburg. They charged the camp, smashed through the fence, and the guards scattered. For a few minutes, it looked like triumph. Inside the wire, hundreds of American officers realized that their own army had come for them. And that is when the whole plan fell apart. Because the camp was nothing like the intelligence had described. Baum's men had been told to expect around 300 prisoners. What they actually found was more than 1,000 American officers, plus thousands of Serbian officers, many too weak to walk. There was no possible way that a few dozen surviving vehicles could carry 1,000 starving men 50 miles back through a closing ring of German troops. The rescue force was suddenly far too small for the people it had come to save. The math was hopeless, and everyone could see it. Now comes the part of this story that has been twisted in the retelling, and the truth is worse than the myth in a different way. Many versions claim that John Waters, Patton's son-in-law, was accidentally shot by the very Americans who came to free him. That is not what happened. When Task Force Baum surrounded the camp, the German commander, hoping to avoid a bloodbath, asked Waters to act as a go-between. Waters agreed. He volunteered to walk out of the camp under a white flag of truce to make contact with the American force and arrange a peaceful handover. He stepped beyond the wire as a man trying to stop the shooting, not a man being rescued in a firefight, and a German soldier, still resisting and not part of the truce, shot him down. The bullet caught him low in the body, a grievous wound. He was carried back inside the camp, where a Serbian doctor, among the prisoners, kept him alive. So the man this entire mission may have been built around was now lying badly wounded inside the very camp the Americans had just broken into, too injured to be moved. The son-in-law could not be saved, and Task Force Baum still had to get home. They left Hammelburg after dark on the 27th of March. Dozens of freed officers climbed aboard the remaining tanks and half-tracks, desperate to escape. The column tried to slip back toward American lines, still roughly 70 miles away. But the Germans had used the time well. They had moved up troops, guns, and tanks, and they had the small American force boxed in. As the sky began to lighten on the 28th of March, Task Force Bomb was surrounded near a wooded hill. Then, the trap closed. Artillery, mortars, and machine gun fire poured in from every direction at once. Half-tracks burst into flame. Tanks were knocked out, one after another. The men scattered into the trees and fought on foot, in small groups, with no hope left and nowhere to run. It was annihilation. Of the roughly 300 men who had set out, only about 35 managed to reach American lines again. Nearly every vehicle was destroyed. The rest of the task force was dead, wounded, or captured, and marched right back into the prison camp they had just tried to empty. Captain Baum himself was shot and taken prisoner. By a bitter coincidence, he ended up being treated by the same Serbian doctor who was caring for Waters. The two wounded men, the leader of the rescue, and the man it was meant to save, lay in the same camp. The cruelest part is what came next. Just 9 days later, on the 6th of April, 1945, regular American forces advancing through Germany reached Hammelburg and liberated XIII-B for real, with the strength to actually hold it and evacuate everyone. Waters was freed, Baum was freed, the camp was taken. If Patton had simply waited, the prisoners would have been rescued anyway, safely, as part of the normal advance, without losing a single man of Task Force Bomb. The entire mission had been for nothing. When word of the disaster reached the Supreme Headquarters, Eisenhower was furious. A celebrated general had diverted men and machines on an unauthorized raid 50 miles behind the line, for no military objective the official record could justify, and had gotten almost all of them killed or captured. By any normal standard, an officer could be relieved of command for that. But Patton was not relieved. The war in Europe had only weeks left to run. Patton was a national hero, his face in newsreels, his name a symbol of American victory. Removing one of the most famous generals of the war, this close to the end, would have been a public earthquake. So, the affair was quietly managed. Patton stuck to his story, that the raid was a diversion to confuse the enemy, and that he had not known for certain his son-in-law was in the camp. The evidence suggests he knew far more than he admitted. But with the finish line in sight, no one in authority wanted the fight. The story was allowed to fade. So what do we make of it? Was the Hammelburg raid the act of a glory-seeking general who could not resist one more bold stroke, even a reckless one? Or was it the most human thing a hard man ever did? A father-in-law who, after 2 years of being unable to help, finally had an army in his hand and could not stop himself from reaching for the one prisoner who mattered to him personally. The men of Task Force Baum paid for that reach. They fought with extraordinary courage on a mission many of them sensed was impossible from the start. And the camp they died trying to open was opened 9 days later anyway by other men at no cost at all. That is the question I want to leave you with, and I would like to hear what you think. Was Patton's raid a forgivable moment of human weakness in a great commander, or an inexcusable abuse of his power that wasted the lives of men who trusted him? Tell me in the comments, because this one genuinely divides people, and I read your answers. If this story held your attention, do me a small favor and tap the like button. It is the single most useful thing you can do, because it tells the platform to show this piece of history to more people who have never heard it. And if you want more stories like this one, stay close, because the next one is just as strange. In the final weeks of the war, Patton's army stumbled onto a hidden mountain vault stuffed with the gold of the Third Reich, looted treasure stacked in the dark of a salt mine. How they found it and what happened to it is a story almost no one tells. Subscribe so you do not miss it. Thanks for watching.